Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to Understanding and Fishing Saltwater Contours. I'm Paul Michele, National Sales Manager for Navionics. What I'm going to do here in a moment is just start sharing my screen, and we'll run through the presentation. Should take about 30 minutes or so, and then we'll leave it open for a little question and answer. At the bottom, you're going to see a little chat signal there, or a little chat signage that you can click on. At any point during this webinar, if you have questions, please go ahead and text them into the chat section, and I'm going to save some time at the end of this to address any questions you might have. If I need to go back to the slide, or if there's anything in particular you're looking for, that'll be your chance to speak up, and I'll just do the best I can to try to help you. So without further ado here, I'm going to share my screen so you can see the presentation. Okay, so again, welcome to Navionics with Reading Saltwater Contours, and hosted by Blue Water Books. A little bit about me and who I am. Again, my name is Paul Michele, a National Sales Manager for the Americas here at Navionics. And why I can talk a little bit more intelligently about this is I've caught over 500 species of fish, both fresh and saltwater, around the world. Do a lot of fishing myself whenever I can. So it's nice to be able to work in an industry that you love and get an opportunity to share it with everybody. Also very avid tournament angler, and posted several tournament wins on a variety of different fish, whether it was sharks or sailfish or trout, bass, snook. So quite a few to my resume on that. And do a lot of these kind of seminars, in particular on finding and catching fish, because a lot of people have questions on, how to read a chart. What do these lines mean? How do I look at it? How does that relate to fish? So I enjoy doing these, and it really helps people out to understand a little bit more about what you're looking at on any chart when you're looking at bathymetrics. And I've been fishing since the age of 3, and I have to thank my grandfather for that, and who used to drag me out and put me on boats and taught me a lot about how to smash flies and catch seaweed. And over time, I eventually caught things with fins. So thanks my grandfather for that one. So again, this is on how to fish saltwater contours. Thank everyone for joining here on the webinar. And again, it should be about 30, 40 minutes. And any questions you've got, again, please click on the chat button. So one of the things I want to start with talking with here is, bear with me one second here. I want to make sure I've got my little spotlight here to kind of give you guys some ideas of where I'm talking about. So looking here, one of the first things I want to talk about is understanding tides and currents. And that's going to come into play here a lot when we look at the different chart slide selections I've posted, because tides and currents in anywhere you fish have a lot to do with where the fish stage on your saltwater contours. So you always want to check your tides. High tide sometimes comes in better with cleaner water. Sometimes your low tide's a little bit better because it's flushing bait out. But anybody that's done any fishing, they'll hear about slack tide. Slack tide, we got to wait a little while. And the reason for that is that nothing's really moving. The water's not coming over. It's not pulling bait. It's not causing eddies or currents. So the fish are just kind of sitting there. Now, one thing with that, go to the next slide here, is with tides and currents in particular. Eventually the next slide. All right, please hold while we are experiencing technical difficulties. Sorry, buddy, give me a second. Here we go. All right, so sorry for that. So down here at the bottom, we've got, you can see where I stopped the tide. And I chose this particular tide for a reason. At the very bottom, you'll see it's towards the top of the tide. One thing when you're drifting with current, some fish seem to bite a little bit better when that tide is a little slower. You've got the opportunity to get your baits down a little deeper, use lighter line. You're not drifting as fast. You're able to keep your baits in the strike zone a little bit longer. So now that does not pertain to all fish. Sometimes you need that current to kick up bait. Offshore, I like a lot more current. Inshore, I like somewhere in between. But, I see a lot of fish that first turn on. When that tide first changes to an outgoing tide, that's usually when a lot of the bait is being flushed out. So the bite usually kicks up earlier than later in a tide. So moving on, we'll look at some examples here. This is examples along passes. So what I mean by a pass, I'm going to give you a little pointer here and show you what I'm talking about, is right in this area right here. You can see this is what we consider a pass, because in between these areas, let me try to give you a little highlight here. So in between these areas, like in this area here and here, you've got these little points that stick out. Now, each of these little lines indicate 1 foot in change for inshore. So you have to picture that as how it falls. So for example, over here, we've got 40 feet. Up top, right here is 40 feet. Up top, now it's gone back on me. So up top, we've got 40 feet down here in the hole, and then up top, we've got 14 foot. You can see how close these lines are together. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a bit, but that's showing a ledge. The tighter those lines are, that means the proximity of those contours are very close, so it's causing a swift drop off. This area over here that I have the arrow pointed to, this is a pass. So this is where you can see there's a hole in deep water. The part that's interesting about that is your bait and your fish are going to travel in and out that pass. So this is current's going out the way the arrow's pointing. Your fish are going to sit more in this deep hole, wait for food to come through and feed. Tide's coming in. They're going to sit on this edge right here on the ledge that the bait pushes along this ledge. They're going to sit in this hole and feed here. You know, could there be a few here trying to ambush a few or right in the current? Absolutely. But look at this as your staging point, because fish or bait, any of the current's going to come through here. A lot of you are coming over a 10-foot bar. Will there be some on this side? Sure there will. But this is your traveling highway. A fish is not going to generally go over a shallow point. He's going to run inside these little cuts. And that's where a lot of your current and a lot of your bait is going to flush coming off these edges. And you can see right here, this ledge along the side here, this ledge in particular has been cut out by the tide pushing against it. So that means there's going to be fish staging here for that current to bring those fish, those minnows and bait fish and shrimp or whatever else right along here. Okay, go to our next slide here. Ledges and current direction. So we've got along here, you can see this ledge. This little ledge right here is dropping off into deep water. Now, we talked a little bit about early on the importance of tide and current. And what that means is if you're trying to anchor, let's say you're fishing for bottom fish and you're looking at this ledge right here. If you anchor right there, let's say the current's coming in this direction here. It's coming from, let's say this is north, coming north to south. If you mark the ledge right now, and then say, okay, I'm going to drop my anchor here. By the time you drift back, you're sitting here, which means you're not chumming or fishing anywhere those fish are. So you need to understand, here's your ledge. When you mark it, back up a little bit and drop your anchor maybe here. So that current drifts you and you stop right here. So the current now is taking, let's say you're chumming, is chumming into this ledge. Keep hitting that screen. Keeps hitting into this ledge. So if you're anchored and your chum's going in that direction, that's going to pull the fish out of the ledge. Same thing with going this way. If the current's going left to right, you want to anchor here. So your boat's sitting here and you're chumming this ledge. So your baits and everything are going to the ledge. Now let's say we've got a south to north current. Current's going this direction. Now if you're marking fish, there's the ledge, and you drop your anchor. For one, good luck getting your anchor back. For two, you're sitting here. So you're chumming into this open water. You want to be dropping your anchor here. So your boat's sitting right here and you're chumming either anywhere from here to here. And you're chumming to bring these fish out of that ledge and dropping your baits right on them. So when you're looking at contours, always keep in mind, how is that current and the tide pushing me in relation to where I want to fish? This is a little screen on eddies. Now what I mean about an eddy, this is really more for offshore. So we look at the eddy right here, you've got this little cut. Okay, now on this cut, if the current's coming north to south, again, assuming up here is north, it's coming this direction, it's going to hit this contour, which is a steep slope. So it's going to push up bait upwards. So what that forms is what people call an eddy. This is where your backwash is. This is a lot of an area where bait gets trapped. Bait's being pushed along, they're hitting this ledge, it's getting pushed up, and you become more vulnerable to the attack of predators. So a lot of pelagic fish in this deep water are going to run and sit near these little eddies. You can see here there's a deep slough. This has all been cut out by current. Again, why I know this, tight contours here, looser contours, and then this area here is obviously a hole because there's no contour. So the fish are sitting in this, watching all this bait boil up like this, and then they're feeding right there. So So this would be an important area if you're trolling that you want to look at. You've got your points. This right here, you've got a point coming out of a shallow water here, 580 dropping in. But right here, we've got a steep little bar that comes up. So again, why is this significant? This is because, again, looking your current north to south, or even south to north in this case, you're hitting this break. It's causing that upwell. That upwell, again, is pushing up bait. It's creating more turbulence on top. It's getting more oxygen. This is an area that a fish is more likely to hold in this hole because of this cutout than sitting out, say, over here. This is just 420 feet of water. He may be there, he may not. But where there's opportunity for upwellings, that's from your plankton all the way up. Big fish eat littler fish, or big fish eat smaller fish, so on up the food chain. This is where your fish are gonna. These are the kind of things you wanna look for when you're offshore. Speaking of offshore, we'll talk a little bit about offshore humps. So on your offshore humps, this one here, if you look in, you've got 422 feet right on the top of this. This is a very popular hump, by the way, off of Marathon down the Keys. I believe this one here is 456. Your surrounding water is 600 feet. So this, again, is a piece of structure. Picture being out in the middle of a desert or anywhere where it's all flat. You got everything flat, and all of a sudden there's a mountain. Well, that's going to draw attention. Hey, what's that over there? You're generally going to walk in that direction. Well, the same thing holds true here with fish. You've got a lump. They're going to go see what that is. Let's go back to our discussion of tides and currents. You've got your upwellings. This is where fish are going to stage. You look here to where my little red dot is right now. That area right there is a steep ledge. That's going to have the strongest upwell because that water is pushing. It's going to hit that lump, and it's going to shove it right up. So your tunas and that kind of stuff are going to sit along that edge. You know, you might have some sharks or something sitting behind here. You know, I mean, not to say that there's not fish even off this side of the ledge. This is where you got to explore a little bit and figure out which way the current's going, which way the fish are sitting. If they're active, they're going to be right in front of that current. If they're still kind of, all right, I'm a little tired, but I still want to eat, they might sit off the side here. You know, if they're real tired, your inactive fish might sit back here. Fish that just, again, generally don't want to fight the current. You might find sailfish back that way. You might find some sharks that are sitting back there, maybe some amberjack. But this is an area where, you know, potentially the less active fish or fish that don't want to fight the current might be. These are the things you want to look at on an offshore hump. So current on humps, I talked about a little while ago. Look at how this current coming through here has carved out this little channel. So right here, we've got a deep hole at 600 feet. This is the hump, comes all the way up to 254 feet with a very sharp ledge and drop off. So all that current that's been pushing here has just carved this out and made a steep bank with a deep hole right here. So this almost becomes a situation where you've got that pathway we talked about earlier, or your cut or passage, with the fact that you got a ledge and a lump. So you've got three different pieces of structure right here when you look at this. So what that's telling you is, again, you might have fish sitting on the top of this that are feeding as fish come over the hump. You might have fish sitting off the ledge here. You've got current pushing up, again, pushing your bait fish up. And you might have fish sitting here off in your deeper hole to where fish that may be injured, let's say there's a minnow that got, you know, disoriented, or his buddy got hit with a sailfish bill and he happened to didn't get eaten, but he got hurt, he's going to fall into that hole. So it's a nice spot for a nice lazy big fish to go ahead and eat that wounded bait that's fallen in there. So this is an example of an offshore hump. Again, look at your numbers between a hump and a hole. You know, you've got 254. When you look down, you've got 600. Here's 504. That's obviously a hole. So the key is the spot soundings as well. Look for those to tell you whether it's a hump or whether you've got a hole that's formed. So ledges off humps, much like we just looked at, here's two humps, a 66 into an 85-foot hole. So you've got, again, a nice drill out here on a ledge from the current that's been moving back and forth, cutting out this little section. Now, just by the way current moves, let's again say this is north to south, or even south to north. Doesn't matter. Let's say south to north, because we keep saying north to south. South to north, current's coming up here. It's going to hit this point, and it's going to dig. Now, the current, the contours are telling me this is a ledge, and the current's moving out. Think a little bit more, too, about how that current is affecting that bottom. It's going to dig into the side of that hole. So mind you, this says it's a ledge that goes straight like this, straight up and down. Well, chances are it may have carved out a piece underneath because the way that current is. So tucked up underneath, hiding from the current, might be all those snapper or bottom fish that you're looking to catch. So when you want to anchor, if the current's going this way, you want to anchor right there. So your boat sits, well, actually you want to drop your anchor here, float back to about here. So hopefully all of your chum is going down deep enough that pulls those fish out of that hole, because otherwise they're never going to see your bait. They're going to smell the chum, they're going to come up, and they're going to eat. If the current's going the other way, you're going to want to drop your boat so you're sitting here. So you might drop anchor here, sit right here, and you're right over the spot dropping baits in their face. So always think about what that bottom looks like. Steep drop-offs, telltale sign. We talked about the tightness of contours. Right here, you're not going to get much tighter a line than that. You've got a drop-off from about 47 feet straight down to 100. Now, why that's important is steep drop-off, a lot of current, a lot of bait moving through. There's probably a lot of little cuts that fish are hiding in there. Or if we look over here, where there's a little area where the current is, the ledge is not there, so it's cut out a little bit. So there may be fish sitting back right here. So the current is coming this way. Ambush predators are going to sit here so they can shoot out and eat that bait, because the current right here is going to be so strong that poor little minnow isn't going to stand a chance, because this fish is going to come out and grab him because he's sitting off in an eddy. Same thing right up here, another great ledge. Fish are going to look to that as an ambush point. So steep drop-offs, very important, especially inshore or offshore. Rocks, reefs, and wrecks. On a chart, you've got identifications for a wreck, and you've got identifications for rocks. So anywhere we have rocks, or reef, these are prime fish holdings. So you can see right here, rock, piles, there's a rock, there's a rock. All of these are fish holding items or features. So you want to find that structure. You want to find any kind of structure that's a reef, a wreck. And again, why? Because it's almost a sanctuary. At the same time, it's a feeding ground. You've got a sunken ship. That's a place that's going to have barnacles that are going to grow. Well, fish feed on barnacles. So you're going to have small fish that are there. Bigger fish eat, that fish, the minnows. Bigger fish eat that one, and so on and so forth up the chain. It's a piece of structure on the bottom that's going to draw more fish rather than a blank, open space. Nothing, unless it's traveling through, there's no reason for a fish to be there. You want to find that structure. Sloughs and cuts. We've got right here, this is a little inshore area for anybody that's on here inshore. I've talked a little bit about offshore. Let's talk a little on inshore. Let me just check my time. Talk a little about inshore. So you've got some drying areas here. This green is a drying area, which means at low tide, you've got 1 foot or less, most likely less. In this section here, you can see where there's a little dip. So it's 7 foot right here, then it's 6 foot, then it's 5 foot. Remember we talked about passages and cuts. Here's a cut in particular that's coming in. Predator fish on this incoming tide is probably going to sit right here. All that current is coming in, washing over mud, which is going to pull off minnows, shrimps, other crustaceans, crabs, going to flow here, and that predator is going to sit in a little bit below the current where that red dot is, and he's going to come up and feed. So you want to remember that coming this way. You look at those contours and say, where would I sit? I want to eat, I want to be lazy, and I want a cheeseburger and a beer just to come right to me. That's where I'm going to be. Your cuts or your sloughs are all these areas here. These are deeper water areas where, again, fish are going to hang out. They're going to cruise. They're going to look to be in those areas. That's a fish highway. They're going to run channels. But these are good feeding locations where those fish may come in. Same thing here with holes in creeks. We look at these spots. This is obviously a channel. Bridges, by the way, great structure. Pilings, cement pieces, stuff that holds fish, stuff that breaks current, places where fish get disoriented. And you've got a hole so fish can get out of the current. And again, bait can wash into this hole, which is where they're going to feed. Got a nice little tide station right here, by the way. Navionics app, that's how it looks like on our tide stations. On a actual chart, it'll look very similar to that, but you'll see T for tide. You can click on it or current. But we've got holes. Here's a nice little hole. Fish are going to stage in these places. This is where they live. Much like this on the flats. You got to think about again, we're going to talk about, relate this to tide. Right here, might only be a foot deep at low tide. But when fish go up here at high tide, that's probably 3-4 feet, which means the rest of this is 2 to 3. So redfish, for example, are going to come up on this flat, or weak fish or sea trout, depending on where you're from in the country. Fish are going to come up here on the flat. They're going to feed at high tide. Well, as that tide drops, they're generally going to try to escape. Well, if it drops too quick, they'll just sit in these 1-foot holes. Now, if you can get up on the flat at low tide and you know where these holes are, you could sit there and absolutely have a ball. The fish will be in those holes. They got nowhere to go. Here comes a bait in front of them. If they're hungry, it's an opportunity they're not going to pass up. So these fish will hide. Here's a 2-foot hole. Again, we're looking at, the blue here is your shallower. You get to the lighter color, it's deeper. So there's a 2-foot hole somebody might be sitting in. Again, 1-foot hole. Over here is a whole ledge and a marina where they could even fall into that on the outgoing tide. So look for these holes where fish could get trapped at low tide. I call this one kind of a deep drain hole for no other reason that here's an 83-foot hole, and we've got this cut that's coming right in here, dropping right into this hole. Again, primary spot for a predator fish to live. They're going to sit there, they're going to hang out in this spot, and they're going to let the current bring everything right to them. No need to move. They can hide out of the current. Low tide, high tide, they can sit there. And if they have to leave, they can just shoot straight out and go somewhere else or back out this way. So it's an area, again, that funnels in. You've got this narrow section all through here. You can see how it's almost a nipple that's coming up. It's all flowing right into this in like a funnel. Actually, it's a better word. It's more of a funnel that's spilling water into there. So any of these fish could be sitting back behind us, letting the current bring them their food. Intercoastal waterway turns. So if you're fishing up in the river or the intercoastal, look for these kind of things. Right here, you've got a hole. What's next to the hole are these steep lines. That's your ledges. So what this tells me is the current has pushed along this edge and dug this out. Again, thinking about structure. Where are fish going to be? They want to be, along where food gets brought to them, but at the same time, some bit of structure or a place to hide or a place they can live. So they're going to sit along these edges. Right up here is a feeding station. Down on the bottom, steep ledge. On top, steep ledge. Very close together. This is going to be a funnel section. Water's pouring in, bringing in the bait. Could they be here along the sandbar? Very possible. There is a chance that some fish might here, but your high percentage is going to be in this area where active feeding is going to occur. Might push them up on the ledge. The bait's going to come up on here to hide, let's say, for example, on this little bar. As soon as they come off the ledge to get back into the channel, they're going to get eaten. That's where your fish are sitting. So think about where that current is pulling and turning. It's ripping out bottom. It's creating ledges and holes. Backwater washouts. This is where you're talking about. Here is a little creek that's coming out, pushing against this back section. Look here, the contours are a little more spread out. Contours are more spread out, but look how tight they get right here. This is telling me that there's current that is flowing out of here very heavily. You've got a hole right here, a hole right here. All that is because the current is washing that out. So again, where's the fish going to sit? Probably right in this hole or right against here where the fish are getting trapped. So let's say it's a mullet that comes out. He comes right here. Predator fish is going to eat him. Or he gets pushed up with the current against here. That predator fish might be sitting off the side ready to eat him there. So this tells you what kind of current and what kind of holes that the fish are going to be in. If the current's going the opposite way, again, there's a hole here. This one, a little bit of a bend. They're probably going to be sitting off a little bit. So you want to look at the bottom as where that current's taking and where the fish can hide. I have no idea what that screen's supposed to be, so we're going to go to the one on docks. Here's the key on docks. Docks, again, structure. Fish are going to relate to structure. Bait relates to structure. It's also a place to hide. Where one section of dock is better than another, well, let's look at the contours. Right here, slow contours coming out off the dock, a little bit shallower, probably not as much current coming through here. We work our way down this dock a little bit. Well, look at what we've got. We've got a little funnel that's pulling in here with deep water. And we've got tight contours under the dock. So what does that tell me? First, deep water for bigger fish to hang out. A ledge, which means there's current that's ripping through, which is going to push bait up against it. And here's deep water. So if I'm a fish, predator fish, I'm going to come in here, I'm going to hang out in the deep section of water. I might let current bring bait to me here, or I might pop over here to the dock where I know there's going to be bait fish that are trapped or trying to get out of the current to get a little break from fighting the current or being with it, and I can push them right up against that wall and eat them. So this is why this section of dock might be better than up here. So with all this, and I'm going to take questions in a moment, Blue Water Books and Charts is offering a fishing bundle. This recording, by the way, is going to be up on the Navionics website probably on, what's today, Tuesday? Probably by Friday. So if you want to come back and review this and take some notes, you're more than welcome to visit www.navionics.com. If you'd like to buy this fishing bundle from Blue Water Books and Charts, it obviously comes with the Navionics Plus, and I'll kind of explain a little bit more about that in a second here. Comes with Saltwater Sportsman and, of course, How to Catch 'em chart. So some suggestions, and that's all from Blue Water Books and Charts at $189, which is actually quite a deal considering that NAV Plus is usually $199. So good opportunity to buy more and catch more fish. One thing I do want to mention is that on that chart, this is everything you're looking at on the 1 foot is what's called a SonarChart with Navionics. So it's a 1 foot bathymetric, but it's available on Platinum Plus charts, Navionics Plus. You do have to download those areas to the chart though online, and a Navionics update. Now what that is, if you have an old chart or a competitor's chart, you can buy that card for $99. So save yourself $100 by having a competitor's card, a CMAP, a Lake Master, a Fishing Hotspots, a variety of others, or an old Navionics, an old gold chart, or anything that's in SD or CF. And you're able to buy an update, $99, and activate it. Point I want to get to is on your plotters, it's going to be listed under chart options on Ray Marine as a SonarChart layer, or on other electronics as a fishing chip. So look under your chart options for SonarChart on Ray Marine or fishing chip on others. So I'm going to go about answering some questions now. I appreciate everybody being here and looking to upcoming webinars as well. Check our website and join the mailing list. But I'm going to stop sharing here a moment, and I can always come back if you've got questions. But at this point, I want to take a quick look. Just out of curiosity, I'm going to put up a quick poll. So let's just see how many people here actually new to fishing. I usually do this in the middle, but I didn't want to interrupt. You should see a little pop-up here to say, are you new to saltwater fishing? Yes or no. Just curious as to kind of what demographics we have on our webinar. Okay, we've got a few people that have found it here. So it looks like we've got a few newbies here. We're about third are new to saltwater fishing. So those that are new, I hope this has helped you. And again, please go back and watch the recording of it. And I also, just out of curiosity, want to know where you guys are from. So don't worry, I'm not asking your address or anything like that, but in what area of the country, nice spell check, what area of the country are you from? East Coast, Southeast, Panhandle, West Coast? Okay, so pretty much split right across the board. A couple here in the Panhandle, but most everybody we've got a third from about everywhere. So I'll share that in case anybody's interested overall to see who's here. So with that, I kind of want to open up questions at this point. If you have any, I'm going to take a look at the chat box and see what we have. I know I've got a question right now as far as a webinar that we were to have on Chinook fishing. I will get back to you on that, Joel, and find out if there's a recording up there for you. What other questions do I have? Here's a Q&A. So Rod, he's fishing salmon and halibut. Do you know if they follow the patterns? Okay, so on salmon and halibut, a little bit different. Very timely as far as, let me try to make this as simple as I can, because you do have resident salmon, and of course you have when they're spawning. So most of your seasons are going to be your spring and fall. I'm going to leave the the resident salmon out of the picture a moment. So do they follow the same habits? As far as current is concerned, yes. They've got a very high sense of smell, we'll call it, where they're going to track back to the tributaries they came from. So they are going to follow a main channel. Do they get up on little eddies and spawn? Absolutely. That is where they're going to pull up and they're going to spawn. So a lot of fish are caught, trolling when they're first moving in along that channel. Fish that are being caught, typically on like an egg sac or a dry fly are usually caught in the eddies. So that's where you're going to look at the chart and say, okay, this is an area of the current. This is an area I want to troll. And then you can say, okay, if I'm throwing flies or I want to drift some egg sacs, that's where you're going to find the eddies. You're going to pull up on those eddies. You're going to drift those eddies based on the contours. So part of that has to do with your time of year, your water clarity, and temperature. But as far as contours are concerned, yes, look for your channels. They're going to follow along those ledges because that's telling them where to go, and especially the eddies. Gets them out of the current, gives them an opportunity. That's where they're going to spawn or even rest. You look at spillways and that. Look for the hole that's below those spillways. That's where those fish are going to sit, rest, and get the energy to jump over the spillway. Does the same information apply to creeks and rivers? Oh, from Australia. Well, Mark, good to hear from you in Australia. So yes, that absolutely does apply to creeks and rivers. I had a lot of information on there from, whether it was offshore, inshore, up on the flats, but absolutely, because fish are going to relate regardless whether they're, an offshore, inshore, or in a creek, the same kind of idea. Everything revolves around structure and current. Depending on the fish you're trying to catch. Obviously barras, and I've caught barramundi in Australia once upon a time. The barras are going to in particular relate to structure behind, let's say, a log. A lot of fish barras are going to be behind the blowdown. They're going to sit in behind that eddy area and they're going to rest. You might have to cast 13 times to get one to bite, but he's going to sit behind that log or behind that rock and wait for that bait to come, hit it, get disoriented, and then he's going to feed. So they're looking at it as an ambush point and also as a place to rest. And if a bigger fish comes after them, a place to hide. So yes, it absolutely does apply to creeks and rivers. Everything's related to structure. Stefan, can you show how contours are updated in the charts with your new software that updates Navionics charts? Okay, so you're talking about updating community layer. Stefan, what I'm going to tell you is, and anybody that's related to that question, he's talking about our SonarChart layer. Sonar charts are updated from community sourcing. So what that means is if you have a raymarine, you can automatically record your logs with a setting on your plotter that ties in your lat long with your depth. If you have a HDS Lowrance, you can do a SonarChart live that automatically draws brand new 1 foot contours as you're boating or fishing. So you can actually see what you're doing as you're going along and see new information. Or JO products and Hummingbird, which can actually record onto a blank card. So what happens is you take that data and it's either uploaded through Plotter Sync or through the SonarChart Live through our mobile app on your phones and goes directly to Navionics, or you're plugging in your chart into the laptop and uploading it. What we then do is take your information, Stefan, and anybody else that submitted logs, and we update the charts. Now, we don't highlight an area saying, hey, Stefan, he updated this area right here. This is a fishy spot. No, we don't highlight it in any way. We just update the chart. So unless you're sharing it with somebody telling you about that spot, nobody really knows. It's a way to update charts where you can get everything. You can search. You can update it. If you want to do your own private area, you might have a creek that's not been mapped. Motor up that creek and just go fishing. By the time you upload those logs, whether it's that you went up there 5 times or the value of community is that maybe 8 other boats went up there. And by the amount of boats and time that someone's gone over an area, it's going to update those charts substantially to new information. All you're going to want to do is take your Navionics Plus chart, Navionics Update, or Platinum chart, plug it into the computer, go to our website, and update the chart. That is going to give you the latest information from Navionics and updating those contours. And you'll actually be able to see the changes, especially on a mobile device. If you want to go back and forth between the Navionics navigation layer and sonar charts, you're going to see a significant difference. Shane, when I download the Navionics, does the charts you're showing show up on my Garmin? Shane, as of right now, we do have a SonarChart for Garmin GPS chart that is available. I don't know. I believe the 5200 is a newer Garmin, so sadly, it's not going to run on that as of today. There was some software that was released from Garmin last year in January that did do some updates and unfortunately blocked our cartography. But the older units can run the SonarChart for Garmin GPS. So we're hoping that there's always conversations. We're hoping we have something worked out with Garmin sometime in the near future, and you'll be able to get those new contours. John, do bluefins stay closer to the coast on their return south in the fall as to more offshore going north in the summer? So from John in New Jersey. So John, I'm going to have to answer that as a yes. I haven't done a lot of bluefin fishing as far as up that way, but I'm going to kind of categorize that from what I do know of them, and that is that I know more bluefin that have been caught off the surf in the fall by far than on the spring. I believe that that has a lot to do with temperature, because they're staying a particular temperature when they're running north versus south. It's a little warmer closer to shore. More importantly, as you well know, I'm sure, John, is that a lot of the bait is on the beach. So your mullet run's going on then, your glass minnows are flowing out. So everything is closer to the beach. Stripers that the bluefin are eating on, bluefish that they're eating on, mullet that they're probably eating on. So the chances of the food source being closer to the beach is why they're running south. They're going to look for food, just like when you're fishing for them, where you see them crashing on, on ballyhoo or rainfish, sometimes offshore. They're looking like anything else for structure and where they can go. So in the fall, my answer to you is yes. I don't know how much that has to do with contours. I think it has to do more with bait and the opportunity to crash bait, up against the bank. So is the eddy the slack water, or is it behind them? So the eddy is, I guess you would consider it the slack water. It doesn't necessarily have to be slack, Rod. It's an area where that current has cut out and it's less current. So let me try to share my screen again here and help you with that one a little better. So let's go back to an eddy here real quick. Bear with me here. Okay, so eddy. So on an eddy, and this isn't exactly but I can use this one. All right, so on here, let me get my little cursor here. So on an eddy, and right in this area here, the strongest part of the current is where it's being washed against the ledge, okay? Same thing with here. Let's use this one. So here's your current that's washing down. Off here, you can see where it dips in a little bit. This dip in, not necessarily slack water, but a lot less current than this. So they're able to sit in here. Think about the fish if he's sitting right there where my red dot is. That's a lot of current if it's coming north to south, pushing against him. If he drops off just a little bit behind this lump, there's still some current and oxygen coming in the water, but not as much as if he was out here. So he's able to rest a little bit. So that way when the bait fish does come down this channel, he's a little more rested. The bait fish is a little disoriented because of the current, and he can shoot out and eat it. So it's not that there's no current, but it's significantly less. If there's zero current, let's say up into here, that section here, probably not as likely to be holding an active fish because there's no current that's really bringing bait to him. You got to think about active. If you're running, in the wind and you're trying to make hay and you're pushing against the wind, you're pretty active. Sooner or later, you're starting to get a little tired. You know what, I'm going to duck behind this post a little bit and try to run behind a truck or something and blocks the wind. Eventually, you're tired, and you know what? You're just going to stop off at the local bar and have a beer, and you're not really active. You're on the stool watching football. So kind of look at it that way as to where those fish are sitting. Not saying there's never fish in a slack water, but they're not generally as active as a fish that's got a little bit of current and a little bit of water movement. Plus, that ripple on top of the water, that actually gives them a little bit of color. If it's flat and it's just see right to the bottom, birds of prey or other predators can very easily see them. Let's say it was salmon, like I was asking earlier. A bear can easily see into a very flat, calm water surface versus ripples, so they don't feel quite as safe. So they're a lot spookier. I'm going to stop sharing and look to our next question here. All right, let's see if we've got any else. That might be about it. I'm going to check chats here. Okay, we've got a couple other ones here that hopped on the chat. So when's the best way to target inshore stripers in the Northeast? The best way to target? Tough one. That'd be a long seminar, Ken. I'm not sure I can get too deep into that. A lot of it, again, relates to, the timing the fish are there, of course. Springtime and your fall is your main run. A lot of fish relate to sloughs, much like we talked about. The sloughs are the channels, drop-offs. You hear a lot of guys talking about chunking. Chunking is great on the edges of humps. That water is pushing clams over a hump, and those stripers are in there, and they're looking to feed on the edge of that. So a lot of people will chunk on that. They'll chunk on a drop-off. Again, you've got a lump that's coming off, dropping into deep water. Those stripers will sit in that water there. Trolling, if you've got bait, you want to look around the schools of bait. Fish are gonna chase bait. They're gonna find schools, and they're gonna follow that. Could they be in blind open water? Sure, that happens. But your chances of success are a lot higher if you're looking to where that bait is. And think about where that bait congregates. Are they on a sandbar? Are they in a drop-off? Are they in some kind of channel or slough? When you're catching fish, stop and take a look at your chart and say, okay, why are these fish here? And look at it and see if you can put, 2 and 2 together. Is there bait there? Why? If there's no bait there, why is this fish here? Is he just traveling at random? Is there some kind of channel edge? What's there? And you'll be able to piece things together as well. But look at a chart first, figure out where you might want to fish, and try those areas. But if you catch fish in other places, there's a reason why. See if you can figure out, what's different about that spot than what relates to on the outside. Question from Leroy here. When ocean water comes in behind barrier islands and floods shallow flats, then flows out via troughs and channels, do we fish in the channels or further out in the larger and deeper river like waterways? Leroy, that's kind of relating again to the idea of your active fish versus your neutral or negative fish. Generally speaking, let's take high tide, for example. When high tide's going on, that water's pushing up into the shallows. That's when your fish are going to get up there higher and they're going to feed. So sitting in a channel then, could you pick up some active fish? Maybe some. Will there be fish that are going to, kind of be cruising by? So let's say you've got a funnel. We had a funnel there. You might want to sit on the edge of that, and you could fish that for fish that are coming into that area. They're not really feeding, but they're coming in that passageway to go up on the shallow flats. You might intercept them on the way up. Once you get closer to that high tide, that's when you're going to push up a little further into the mangroves. You're going to look for oyster bars. You're going to look for, some kind of a mud flat. You're going to look for bait. That's when you're going to look for the structure. Now, when the tide stops and goes out, that's where you're going to have two things happen. One, you're going to have your fish leaving. So you're going to fish on that first area where they're leaving and going out into the main waterways. And you're going to have fish that are sitting there waiting for the minnows and the shrimp and everything to come out. Again, that's where you're going to fish the mouth. Now, fish that have kind of said, okay, I'm too big to get that close. Let's say you're looking for a shark, for example. A shark might not be in that 3-foot section of water right where the water comes out. He might be sitting back a little bit, let's say 6 foot. He's not as concerned about the shrimp that maybe the redfish or the trout or the flounder are. He's more interested in a bigger fish. Maybe it's a mullet that's too big for the redfish to eat. He comes out, gets to 6 foot, that shark's sitting there. So part of that has to do with the depth of what fish you're looking for as well. So think about the size of the fish, what the current's doing, and is he an active fish or is he kind of neutral? If he's neutral, he's going to be sitting in deeper water. You can almost have to bump him in the face to get him to eat. Whereas if he's up closer, he may chase it. Let's see if we've got anything else here. Where do you feel the best spots are for halibut in offshore areas? Halibut really is one of two things. The halibut are generally going to be on your deep holes, or they're going to be on top of a hump. Most of the areas I've caught halibut have been related to offshore humps. So you're looking at an area, let's say, that's about, and I'm running short on time. Let me see if I can. Well, this won't be exactly a fair example, Ron, but let me share screen again here. I'd like to use the Navionics chart. We have our web app that has charts from around the world, but I'm not going to have time to find one for you. Let me just use this one here, which is kind of an offshore hump. So on your halibut fishing, you've got, let me get my pointer. So on your halibut fishing, halibut are generally going to relate mostly to a lump. Now, forget about for a moment that this is, well, you don't have to, that this is a 402 peak. Let's just say that this whole area happens to be 300 foot and out here is 400. Becomes basically a big sandbar. Those halibut are going to lay up on those sandbars, and that's just the area they like to lay out. They like to be up on that. That's where they feed. That's where bait fish comes over. You know, they've got a better opportunity with, you know, to jump up and grab the bait. A lot of bait lives on a sandbar or a reef, but the other part is if they're in 600 foot, that bait fish could be all the way up in 300. Halibut isn't going to swim up 300 feet to eat that bait. But if he's on that sandbar and it comes up and it's just a 100-foot difference, those bait fish have to come up over it, or a school of bait's a lot closer. The distance for him to feed is shorter. So humps are always a very good spot for halibut or even flounder or fluke. The other one is a hole. And a hole is good because, again, they're on the bottom. Mind you, they're more active than what people think they are. But in a hole, they're going to sit in that deep hole right off a bar where that bait's going to fall off the hump and into the hole, and they're going to sit there and be lazy and eat it. You know, a lot of big fluke and flounder on the East Coast, if guys are here looking for that, a lot of them sit in those holes. You'll hear about people catching, 10-pound flounder, which is not a very big halibut, but a 10-pound flounder sitting in the shipping channels or, in the holes off of a reef because they're a bigger fish. They want a little deeper water. They're looking for a bigger bait, and they're lazy. They're not going to get up in the strong current and fight it. They want to sit where bait's dropping to them. So that's I would always generally say to, check your lumps, your offshore humps or lumps first, and then maybe try out a deep hole. See if they're sitting in that. And a lot of that could relate to, water temperature. They might want to drop deep up in the bays and that, when they're spawning. I haven't done a lot of that, but, I know they get them as shallow as 80 foot. Maybe look for ledges along the lumps. I can't give you a lot of info on the spawning when they get shallow, but offshore, lumps first, then look to deep water. All right, see if we have anything else. And Shane, when targeting wahoo, what would be an important factor to look for? Ledges and wrecks. Number one, Shane, you want to find those steep drop-offs on the ledges. And of course, you could pull live bait, but obviously speed trolling is a very, very popular way to catch wahoo. Anywhere from 10 to 16 knots, depending on the size of the fish. The Bahamas, I know they do a lot of trolling in that 12 to 14 mile or 12 to 14 knot radius. Anywhere else, they be as slow as 8, but a lot of people do 10 to 12. What you want to keep in mind, Shane, when you're trolling wahoo for high speed in particular is make sure your baits are heavy enough. If you have a light bait, it's going to skip all over the surface. It's not going to look natural. They're going to miss it. It's not doing what it's supposed to be. It's kicking out. You want to put a nice heavy lead weight in some cases in front of it, or use a heavy enough skirt so that it stays at least underwater or chugs on occasion coming up. They'll give it a lot more natural presentation, a lot easier for a wahoo to target. But definitely look for steep ledges, a lot of current that's there. They're going to run those ledges. Maybe some of those offshore eddies we talked about. Think about the humps. I talked about where, there's bait fish on humps. Tuna are going to gather there. Well, wahoo do love to eat tuna. So there'll be wahoo looking at those areas too. But again, that's a ledge. So you got a hump with a ledge. Tuna might be there offshore, so will the wahoo. Inshore, your drop off, so will the wahoo. Never overlook wrecks as well. A hungry wahoo, if he's traveling out in the open water, will certainly stop by a wreck to see if there's an easy meal. Wrecks congregate a lot of fish. Certainly a wahoo is going to stop in there and take a look. So think about ledges, think about wrecks, and think about humps that have steep drop-offs. That's going to be your best opportunities. I think after that, ladies and gentlemen, we've about answered everything. So again, I'm going to post this up. It'll probably be up on Friday. I appreciate everybody that came on tonight for the webinar. Hope this was helpful. And thank you. And please, again, look for Navionics website to watch this webinar and any others coming up. If you are looking to buy a chart that has added contours, please do look to our sponsor tonight, Blue Water Books and Charts. Look for the Navionics Plus, Navionics Update, or Platinum cards. Thank you, everybody, and have a great week and good fishing.